Are you delivering the coffee, ma'am? The question, slick with a patronizing smirk, sliced through the low-frequency hum of the Joint Operations Center, JOC Annex. Major Natalie Ford did not immediately turn around. She stood before the secure access terminal, her common access card, CAC, held between her index and middle fingers, patiently waiting for the system to process her credentials. The air, chilled to a precise 68,000 $circ to cool the server racks, suddenly felt warmer on the back of her neck. She had selected a simple, professional royal blue blouse for the temporary duty assignment. Apparently, this choice, worn under a fleece jacket she'd draped over her bag, was a source of confusion for the young captain standing behind her, whose reflection she could clearly see in the terminal's dark screen. He was textbook, a sharp haircut, crisply ironed OCPs, and an air of unearned confidence that likely stemmed from a command climate mistaking arrogance for leadership potential. "I'm sorry?" Natalie asked, her voice calm and perfectly even. She kept her attention on the screen as it blinked, thinking. "The coffee," he repeated, jutting his chin toward a small kitchen alcove in the corner. "The colonel likes a fresh pot before the 0900 brief. If you're not with the catering staff, then this area is restricted to cleared personnel only." His tone was the auditory equivalent of a condescending pat on the head. In the periphery, 2 Air Force staff sergeants, both buried in checklists at a nearby console, looked up. Their typing paused, signifying an audience was forming. Natalie finally turned, a slow, deliberate movement. She allowed her eyes to travel from his polished boots up to the silver bars on his chest. "Captain Davis, according to the name tape, I am cleared personnel, Captain." She held up her Kiasi. The gold chip gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Major Natalie Ford." Davis's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before he instantly reassembled it, stronger this time. He squinted at her ID. "A major, right? Well, ma'am, I haven't seen you around here before. This is the SOCOM JC. We have specific access rosters. What's your unit?" This was the part she despised. Not the challenge. Security was security. But the transparent disbelief. The insinuation that her presence, as a woman with auburn hair and green eyes, was an anomaly requiring special scrutiny. "I'm here for the morning brief," she stated, her voice remaining placid. The terminal in front of her beeped, a cheerful green light confirming, "Access granted." She slid her card out. Davis stepped forward, placing a hand on the terminal's frame, effectively blocking her path. "Hold on, let me see that." Natalie held her card out for him. He took it, his fingers brushing hers, and held it up to the light as if inspecting a fake diamond. "Ford. Okay, I'm still going to need to verify your access. We've had issues with credential errors." It was a lie, and both of them knew it. An error on a KAC would have triggered an armed military police response, not a condescending interrogation. He was fishing, enjoying the small dominion he had carved out for himself in this chilly, windowless room. The 2 staff sergeants were now watching openly, their pre-flight checklists completely forgotten. "Captain," Natalie said, her patience starting to fray at the edges. "The system, which is linked directly to the Defense Enrollment Eligibility Reporting System and the Joint Personnel Adjudication System, just verified my credentials and my clearance level. It seems to believe I belong here. Are you suggesting its algorithm is flawed?" His jaw tightened. He was losing control of the encounter and clearly disliked it. He looked from her face, with her auburn hair tied back in a neat regulation bun, down to her simple blue top and then back to the KC. "I'm suggesting that I am the acting officer in charge of this annex until my commander arrives, and I have a duty to ensure everyone in this CIA has a valid reason to be here. A name and a rank on a piece of plastic isn't enough. I need to know your billet. Who are you working for?" "My billet is not relevant to my authorized presence in this room, Captain," she said, her voice dropping a half octave. It was the tone she used when explaining a complex tactical problem to a slow-thinking subordinate, a voice that carried an implicit warning. "The screen said I have access. I'm going to my console." She reached for her card. He pulled it back. "I don't think so," he said, his voice rising slightly. "We can do this one of two ways. You can tell me who your sponsor is, or I can call the MPs and have them escort you out while we sort this out. Your choice." The word escort was a deliberate humiliation, implying wrongdoing. "Captain Davis, your own regulations, specifically US SOCOM Directive 38-11, state that electronic verification via the Secure Access Control System is sufficient for entry into a skiff, provided the individual's clearance is adjudicated and their identity is confirmed. You have my ID. You saw the system grant me access. Any further delay you cause constitutes a willful obstruction of a superior officer in the performance of her duties, a violation of Article 90 of the UCMJ." She recited the information coolly and precisely. For a moment, Davis looked stunned. He hadn't expected a point-by-point legal rebuttal. He glanced around the room, feeling the weight of the audience's attention. He had committed himself to this path, and now felt he couldn't back down without losing face. He saw her as a test, and he was determined to win. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more insulting than his previous shouts. "Look, ma'am, Major, I'm sure you're very important, but we have actual mission planning happening here. High-level stuff. If you're from Public Affairs or the JAG office, you can get your brief from the summary later. Right now, I need this console for my team." He was creating a narrative for the onlookers, painting her as an outsider, a support officer who had wandered into the operational heart of the command. He gestured to the workstation she was trying to access, one of the primary mission command nodes. Natalie took a slow, deliberate breath. "I am not from PAO or JAG. That console is assigned to me for the duration of this exercise. Now, if you'll return my identification card, I have work to do." As she spoke, her fingers idly brushed against a heavy metallic object in her jacket pocket, which was slung over her bag on the floor. It was a habit she had when her patience was tested. Davis's eyes followed the motion. "What's that in your pocket?" he demanded, his focus shifting, looking for any new angle of attack. "Another challenge coin from the Spouses Club bake sale?" Natalie paused. She reached into the pocket and pulled out the object. It was a challenge coin, but it was unlike any he had seen. It wasn't perfectly round or polished. It was thick, heavy, and irregularly shaped, forged from what looked like melted-down artillery shell casings. In the center was a stark, stylized carving of a winged dagger plunged into a mountain peak. There was no unit name, no motto, just the raw, brutalist symbol. The captain scoffed. "Cute. Did you make it in arts and crafts?" The coin felt cool and substantial against Natalie's palm. She didn't register the captain's joke. Instead, she heard the deafening rotor wash of a Black Hawk helicopter fighting against a high-altitude wind in the mountains of Afghanistan. She felt the biting cold, the air so thin it hurt to breathe. The coin was a memento, a bond forged in fire and ice on a mission that never made the news. It was given to her by the Afghan commando leader, a man with ancient eyes and a warrior's soul. This was after she had called in a danger-close airstrike that saved his entire Kandak battalion from being overrun. He had pressed it into her hand and said in Pashto, "You are the Sky Warrior. You have the heart of a lion." The winged dagger represented her, the mountain, the impossible peak they had taken together. The memory was so vivid, so immediate, that for a second the sterile air of the JOC smelled of cordite and dust. She blinked, returning to the present. Davis was still talking, his voice a droning annoyance. "So unless you can provide me with a 3-star general who can personally vouch for you, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." That's when the warrant officer in the corner, the one with the face like carved wood, finally moved. He'd been watching the entire exchange, his eyes narrowed. He had seen Davis take her CAC and had gotten a clear look at the name Ford. To him, the name was familiar, but it was the call sign whispered in after-action reports and intelligence summaries that he truly remembered. Valkyrie. He didn't stand up. He didn't say a word to the captain. He simply swiveled in his chair, picked up the secure telephone on his desk, and punched in a 4-digit extension. He shielded the receiver with his hand, his back to the unfolding drama. "Sir, it's Chief Warrant Officer 4 Miller," he said quietly, his voice urgent. "You need to come down to the JOC Annex right now." A pause. "No, sir. The network is fine. We have a situation, a personnel issue." Another pause. Miller's eyes flicked over to where Captain Davis was now puffing out his chest, preparing for his final triumphant move. "It's Captain Davis, sir. He's detaining a visitor. He's got Major Ford." "Yes, sir. That Major Ford. Valkyrie." The silence on the other end of the line was more eloquent than any shout. Miller knew what was happening in that office 4 floors up. He could practically hear the clatter of a coffee mug being slammed down, the scraping of a chair being shoved back, and the thunderous eruption of a full-bird colonel realizing that one of his proudest peacocks was trying to pluck the feathers of a golden eagle. Help was on the way. The audience in the JOC Annex now sensed it too. The air, already thick with tension, was now charged with the unmistakable electricity of impending justice. Colonel Mark Theron, Deputy Commander of Operations for the entire Joint Command, stared at the secure phone receiver in his hand as if it had sprouted tentacles. "Are you certain, Miller?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Positive, sir," the Chief Warrant Officer's voice crackled back. "I saw her CAC. Ford N.A. He's making a scene, threatening to call the MPs." Theron slammed the phone down. The sound echoed in his spacious, wood-paneled office. He stood up, his chair flying back and hitting the credenza behind him. Captain Davis, a sharp officer, good on paper, but with an ego that could eclipse the sun, had just cornered one of the most vital and discreet operational commanders in the entire theater. "Sergeant Major!" Theron bellowed, his voice carrying easily through the thick oak door. The door swung open instantly. Command Sergeant Major Wallace, a man composed entirely of muscle, discipline, and scar tissue, stood in the doorway. "Sir, get the command staff. My vehicle now. We're going to the JOC Annex." "Is there an exercise alert, sir?" "Worse," Theron growled, grabbing his cover from a hook. "We have a blue-on-blue fratricide incident in progress. An officer is about to shoot his own career in the head, and I have to stop him before he takes the whole command's credibility with him." He strode past the sergeant major and down the hall, pulling up Major Natalie Ford's file on his secure tablet. As he walked, the screen lit up with a string of accomplishments that read like a Spec Ops recruiting poster. West Point, Distinguished Honor. Graduate from the Sapper Leader Course, Ranger School, Bronze Star with Valor device for actions during a close-quarters ambush in Iraq. And then there was her current billet, so heavily classified it was designated only by a code name. Commander, Joint Special Operations Task Force Viper, JSOTF Viper. JSOTF Viper wasn't just any task force. It was the tip of the spear's tip, a multi-service, multinational unit responsible for the most sensitive missions. Natalie Ford, at 34 years old, commanded assets that most 4-star generals would envy. She was a ghost, a legend whispered about in classified circles, and Captain Davis, in his infinite wisdom, thought she was here to pour the coffee. Back in the JOC Annex, Captain Davis had reached his endgame. He felt the eyes of the room on him and wrongly interpreted their stunned silence as support for his authority. He had given the Major a chance to comply, and she had met him with defiance and legalistic jargon. It was time to put an end to the charade. "All right, ma'am. I'm done asking," he announced, his voice booming with false authority. He pulled his radio from his belt pouch. "I'm calling the Base Defense Operations Center. I'm going to report an unauthorized individual in a secure facility, possibly under false pretenses and with fraudulent identification. They will escort you to a holding area until this can be verified." He leveled a final, vicious threat. "It's a serious charge, Major. You could be facing a court-martial." He was pushing her past the point of no return. Natalie Ford just looked at him. Her face was a mask of placid neutrality, but her green eyes were cold, hard chips of ice. She didn't speak. She just waited. She had seen men like Davis before. Predictable, always eventually overplaying their hand. He was about to press the transmit button on his radio when the main doors to the JOC annex swung open with such force that they banged against the stoppers. The room fell into a silence so profound that the hum of the servers sounded like a jet engine. Colonel Mark Theron strode into the room, his face a thundercloud. Flanking him was Command Sergeant Major Wallace. Behind them were the J3 Operations Chief, a Navy captain, and the Command Senior Enlisted Leader. The sheer weight of the collective rank that had just entered the room was suffocating. They weren't walking. They were hunting. Captain Davis froze, his finger hovering over the transmit button. He had been expecting a pair of junior MPs, not the entire senior command of the base. Colonel Theron's eyes swept the room, ignoring everyone until they landed on the tableau in the center. He walked directly toward them, his boots echoing on the polished concrete floor. He didn't stop at Captain Davis. He walked right past him as if he were a piece of furniture and came to a halt directly in front of Natalie. He snapped to the sharpest, most respectful position of attention Davis had ever seen. His back ramrod straight. "Major Ford," Colonel Theron said, his voice ringing with authority. He raised his hand in a salute that was crisp and perfect. "My sincerest apologies for the delay and for the unprofessional welcome you have received. I assure you it is not indicative of this command." Natalie returned the salute, her own movements economical and precise. "Colonel, no apology necessary. Your captain was just being thorough with his security protocols." The words were professional, but they carried a razor's edge. The entire room understood the subtext. Davis looked like he had been punched in the gut. Colonel Theron dropped his salute and turned, his eyes finally falling on Davis. The temperature in the room dropped another $10 or so, circ dollars. "Captain," he began, his voice deceptively soft. "Give me the Major's identification card." Davis fumbled with the key, his hand shaking slightly, and held it out. Theron snatched it from his grip and handed it back to Natalie with a respectful nod. Then he turned his full, undivided attention back to Davis. "Captain Davis," Theron said, his voice now rising to a controlled roar that filled every corner of the space. "Let me provide you with a small piece of situational awareness, since yours seems to be so catastrophically deficient." He gestured toward Natalie. "For the benefit of everyone in this room, this is Major Natalie Ford. While you were busy ensuring she wasn't the barista, you failed to recognize the lead planner for Operation Serpent Strike, the officer who personally rewrote this command's entire irregular warfare doctrine. You failed to recognize the commander who 2 months ago led a joint task force on a hostage rescue mission that resulted in 0 friendly casualties and the recovery of all 3 assets. She has conducted more direct action missions than your entire company combined." He took a step closer to Davis, who seemed to be shrinking inside his uniform. "More to the point, Captain, Major Ford is currently the commander of Joint Special Operations Task Force Viper. Her name is on the access roster you were supposed to have memorized this morning. Her brief, which you are now officially late for, is to inform this entire command about a credible, imminent threat to our forward operating bases, a threat her operators uncovered. You weren't obstructing a visitor, Captain. You were obstructing the single most important person on this base today. You were obstructing the mission." A collective gasp went through the room. Special Operations Commander. The title hung in the air, heavy and absolute. The jokey, patronizing question about her rank now seemed like a sacrilege. Colonel Theron wasn't finished. He jabbed a finger at Davis's chest. "You didn't fail a security check, Captain. You failed as a leader. You saw a uniform you didn't recognize in a face you didn't expect, and you made an assumption. You chose ego over duty. You chose bias over procedure. You are a disgrace to that rank and to this command." The public rebuke was brutal, a verbal vivisection performed in front of his peers and subordinates. The colonel then turned to address the room. "Let this be a lesson to every single person here. The standard is the standard. It does not have a gender. It does not care what you look like. Competence is the only currency that matters in this profession. If you can't see the warrior for the uniform, you don't belong in one." He turned back to Natalie, his expression softening. "Major, the floor is yours. We are ready for your brief." Natalie gave a single sharp nod. She looked past the colonel, her gaze briefly meeting Captain Davis's. He looked utterly broken. She felt a profound sense of waste. She then addressed the colonel, her voice clear and steady for all to hear. "Thank you, Colonel. But if I may add one thing, the lesson here isn't that we should soften standards. It's that we must apply them fairly and universally. Don't look at a person and ask if they meet the standard. Look at the standard and ask if they meet it. It's a simple distinction, but it's everything." Her words landed with the force of a final, unassailable truth. As she spoke, she glanced down at the heavy coin still in her hand. The winged dagger. The image in her mind was crystal clear now. Not the quiet ceremony with the Afghan commander, but the moment before, the frantic radio chatter, the screams, the whip crack of incoming fire. She was on the floor of a vibrating Black Hawk, the door gunner blazing away as she orchestrated a symphony of destruction from 3 different airframes on a mountainside swarming with enemy fighters. She was 29 years old, and she was the calmest person in the sky, her voice a lifeline for the men trapped on the ground below. She had earned her authority not in a briefing room, but in the crucible of combat where assumptions got you killed. That coin wasn't a souvenir. It was a receipt for a debt paid in courage and blood. The fallout was swift and decisive. Captain Davis was formally relieved of his duties as acting OIC of the Annex, pending a full command investigation. Colonel Theron, true to his word, used the incident as a command-wide teaching moment. A mandatory training refresh on equal opportunity, harassment, and most pointedly, proper leadership and professional courtesy was implemented within 72 hours. New Standard Operating Procedures, SOPs, were published for all access points, explicitly stating that electronic verification was the sole determinant of access, with a picture of a PAC and its security features included for the willfully obtuse. Weeks later, the dust had settled. Natalie's brief had been a masterclass in operational intelligence, and the threat she had outlined was neutralized by a series of precise, targeted operations she herself directed. Her time at the main base was coming to an end. One evening, she was on the indoor running track at the base gym, methodically ticking off miles when she saw a familiar figure standing by the water fountain. It was Davis. He was in physical training gear, but he stood with a slumped posture that seemed alien to his formerly proud bearing. He saw her, and for a moment he looked like he was going to turn and flee. Instead, he took a deep breath and walked toward her as she slowed to a stop. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of all its former arrogance. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Major Ford, I wanted to apologize. What I did was inexcusable. There's no excuse. I was wrong. I was unprofessional, and I was disrespectful. I'm sorry." The apology was earnest, born of deep and genuine humiliation. Natalie studied him for a moment. She could have dismissed him, walked away, and he would have deserved it. But that wasn't her way. "Your apology is accepted, Captain," she said, her tone neutral. He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and shame. "Thank you, ma'am. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I understand that I have a lot to learn." Natalie nodded slowly. "We all do, every day." She decided to offer him not forgiveness, but a compass. "Let me give you one piece of advice, Captain. From now on, when you meet someone, don't look at the package. Read the resume, the skills, the experience, the qualifications. That's all that matters. The rest is just noise." A seed of mentorship planted in the hard soil of his failure. It was up to him to water it. He simply nodded, a profound understanding dawning on his face. "Yes, ma'am, I will." She gave him a final curt nod, then turned and resumed her run, leaving him by the water fountain to contemplate the most valuable and most painful lesson of his career.